So Dr. Manweller is Associate Professor of Political Science at Central Washington University, where he teaches constitutional law and economic policy. He is the author of several books and scholarly articles on tort reform, voting behavior, economic modeling, and state courts. He also serves in the Washington State Legislature, representing the 13th District in the House of Representatives. He is the ranking member of the Labor and Workforce Development Committee and serves on the Joint Select Committee on Pensions. He received his bachelor's degree in economics from Whitman College, his master's from the University of Montana, and his PhD from the University of Oregon. He is married to Shelley, and they have 2 children, Lincoln and Grayson. Please welcome Dr. Matt Manweller.
Thanks, Rick. You'll have to forgive me about the Oregon part of the resume. There's nothing I can do about it. Well, I was excited to be invited here. You know, Washington is an interesting experience. I'd like to say of Washington that we have a tendency to replace what works with what sounds good. And that's exactly what this initiative is attempting to do, is it is ignoring about 200 years of empirical evidence in exchange for something that sounds good and makes you feel good when you go to the voting booth. Not that we go to voting booths anymore, but we used to. And it's not necessarily making a mistake, it's repeating a mistake that we've already made. The current minimum wage law in Washington is tied to the inflation rate, and we've seen through empirical evidence, all the measurement tells us that it has been very harmful. Not only do we have the highest minimum wage rate in the country, but not surprisingly to anybody who owns a calculator, we have the highest youth unemployment in the United States. Anybody want to hazard a guess as to the percentage of Washingtonians under the age of 19 that are unemployed? It's pretty close. It's about 30%. If you are an African American under the age of 19, you have a 38% unemployment rate in Washington State. It is a horrific policy. And if you turn it around and you actually measure employment rates, because remember, unemployment only measures those who are actually still looking for a job and haven't given up. The employment rate of kids at the age 16 to 19 in Washington is 25%. So that's a 75% unemployment rate, and we're higher than almost anywhere in the country. Okay, so we know this doesn't work, but we're going to try it again anyways. What I want to talk to you about today are 2 relatively technical issues that I will try to convey in a manner that I think will help us grasp the unintended consequences of this public policy. One, I want to talk about capital mobility, or sometimes referred to as capital flight. And one of the lessons that we learned through globalization, starting in the 1990s, was that all capital is mobile. We learned that. All capital is mobile, and it wasn't before the 1990s. But this is why your taxes are done in India. This is why your cars are built in Mexico. This is why your cloud data is hovering somewhere over Quincy, Washington. Is that all capital is mobile now. And people can take their capital and they can move to places or environments that will garner a greater return on that capital. Okay? And that is one of the reasons why for 20 years, since the 1990s, we've had generally non-inflationary growth. But to quote Orwell's Animal Farm, if you ever read that when you were in high school, all pigs are created equal, but some pigs are more equal than others. Do you remember that line? Well, all capital is mobile, but some capital is more mobile than others. And the reason that SeaTac has been targeted is that you have the least mobile capital. Okay? That's why you've been targeted. This is not an accident. This is not happenstance. You've been targeted because you possess capital that is the least mobile, at least in the short run. Yes, folks, if I own a manufacturing plant, I can move to Mexico or India or Canada. Airports don't move that easily. Okay? Airports just aren't that mobile. They take massive amounts of land, billions of infrastructure, and they just don't move that easy. Okay? You can move warehouses, but hotels are tied to geography. If you're truly going to do something on economic efficiency, then the best place to build a hotel would be in the middle of the Arizona desert, where land costs are incredibly cheap and labor costs are just as cheap. But But you don't build hotels in the middle of the Arizona desert because nobody wants to go there, okay? At least not normal people, right? But hotels are tied to geography. They're not as mobile as other types of capital. So the drafters of this initiative know that unlike 99% of the industries in America, the exit option is less available to the entrepreneurial class of SeaTac, okay? What they don't understand is that all capital is mobile in the long run, even if it is not mobile in the short run. And depreciation, like age, okay, affects everybody. Nobody's immortal, and nobody's capital is not affected by depreciation. And so what we will see in SeaTac is a difference between short-run effects and long-run effects. Your capital will become mobile, not in the day after the initiative is passed, God forbid, but it'll be mobile when your infrastructure is up for reinvestment, okay? The owner of this hotel, and I don't know who it is, okay? Let's say the initiative passes. The day after the initiative passes, he's not going to demolish the building. He's not going to fire half the staff, okay? This is not that mobile. But the day is going to come when this 20-year-old hotel is 30 years old hotel. And the owners of that hotel are going to make a decision. Do we reinvest $20, $30 million in this hotel, or do we invest in a newer hotel 3 miles to our left? Okay? Short-term, not mobile. Long-term, mobile. And we've already learned this painful lesson in Washington State, and you don't have to look any farther than Boeing and Everett. 10 years ago, the unions tackled the very non-mobile capital that was Boeing. They said, you're not going to move your multi-billion-dollar airplane infrastructure out of Everett. You're not going to move your $1 billion worth of capital investments. And they were right. And they had Boeing over a barrel. And they got all the concessions they wanted. But all things are affected by depreciation and technology. And so time passed, and the buildings in Everett began to age, and technology advanced, and the time came for the Boeing engineers and the Boeing managers to say, it is time to reinvest. It is time to develop a new line. It's time to develop new infrastructure. Should we reinvest that here, or is now the time to move? And of course, what they did is they moved to South Carolina, where there was a much more favorable opportunity and favorable return on their investment. So the effects were not immediate. And this is the seductive allure of initiatives like this, because they're going to turn around and tell you, look, there was no effect. We passed this initiative and nothing happened. Okay? But it will happen. It just takes time. And if you don't like the Boeing example, the more powerful example is the city of Detroit. Okay? All you have to do is go back and look at the city of Detroit. One of the most wealthy, cosmopolitan, urbane population centers in the United States. Home to incredible wealth. The big three were all there, producing Chryslers and GMs and Fords, and the unemployment rate was incredibly low. And people like the Labor Council came and started to hold capital and entrepreneurs hostage. And in the short run, GM and Chrysler and Ford had no choice but to capitulate. Right? They had billions and billions of dollars of capital on the line, and they weren't going to cut off their nose to spite their face. And Detroit did not suffer in the immediate. But of course, over time, believe it or not, the Pinto became obsolete. Right? Handcrafting of cars became obsolete. And by the 1980s, when it became time to reinvest in the automobile industry, the owners of that capital said, well, should we reinvest in Detroit, or should we reinvest in Mississippi, in North Carolina, in Mexico, in Canada? So it took some time, but how do you turn one of the most cosmopolitan and wealthy population centers in the United States into a place that literally looks like a war zone? You do things like this initiative that's being proposed in SeaTac, and it will take some time. But hey, we can beat Detroit too. That's a heck of a rallying cry, but not necessarily an economic plan. The second issue that bears consideration is something called labor elasticity, which is a very fancy word for asking the question, how much does a change in price affect a change in demand for labor? Okay? So to kind of clarify, right, what we're asking ourselves is this simple question. If we raise the price of labor, do you buy a lot less of it? Do you buy a little less of it? Or is the consumption of and the hiring of labor completely unaffected by a change in the price? That is called elasticity, okay? Some goods are very elastic. Ice cream is elastic. If you raise the price of ice cream by 25 cents, people will stop buying it because there are many substitutes. There's frozen yogurt, there's cookies, there's popsicles. There are so many substitutes that the elasticity of ice cream is very high. You change the price a little and the demand changes a lot. On the other hand, there are other goods that are very inelastic, like insulin. You jack the price of insulin by 10 bucks and you buy the same amount. You know why? There are no substitutes for insulin. You buy it or you die, right? Gasoline is relatively inelastic. If the price of gasoline goes up 25 cents a gallon, guess what? You're still going to fill your tank. You're not going to say, well, I'm not driving this week, right? It's inelastic. You have to have it, right? So the great question in these debates is labor elastic or inelastic? Will our hiring of labor actually change if we jack the price to 15 bucks an hour and promise sick and safe leave and all of these other benefits? And here's where it gets tricky. Here's where it gets tricky. You are going to hear two arguments in the absolute opposite direction, and they will both be right. You will hear two arguments in exactly the opposite direction, and they will both be right. Now, how is that possible? Well, here's what the advocates of this initiative are going to come forward and they're going to say. They are going to say, labor is inelastic. If you change the price of it, people will hire just as much labor as they did the day before. And they are right in the short run. In the short run, people are not going to shut down their businesses the day after. Okay? They're not going to shut down that $5 billion airport because the price of a baggage handler went to $15 an hour. They're not going to do it. Okay? They will bear those costs. Trust me. SeaTac as an airport will stay open the day after. Okay? Now prices will go up immediately. Don't get me wrong. Prices will go up immediately. There's no way to avoid that. But that's what they're going to say. And they're going to provide statistics that prove that they're right. They're going to say, here are examples where cities jacked the minimum wage and hiring did not go down at all. On the other side, the business community and the opponents of this initiative are going to say, labor is elastic, and if you jack the minimum wage to 15 bucks, you will see an increase in unemployment. And they are right, but they are only right in the long run. So how is that? What is the substitute good for labor? Machinery. That's exactly right. Automation. But automation doesn't occur overnight, does it? It takes time, it takes investment, it takes technological change. So what we will see happen, and what we have seen happen in the past, is that people begin to invest in automation that replaces labor with machinery over the long run. And again, you don't have to look much farther than Washington State itself. Let's go to Boeing. Boeing, very recently, has decided to start painting all of its planes with robots and machines, okay? They were paying people $10 to $12 an hour, sick leave, okay, health insurance, all of these mandated benefits, and they said, you know what? With a few $1 million of upfront capital investment, we can come up with a machine that paints these wings for nothing, right? Now, yeah, we're going to be $3 million down in the short run, but we're going to recoup all of that in labor costs in the long run. And so now what's happened is all those people who had jobs at 10 to 12 bucks an hour are unemployed. Okay. How many of you have been to a fast food restaurant lately? You go in and and they've got these very fancy, expensive machines to pour your Coke or your pop for you. Have you seen that? Why would Jack in the Box, why would McDonald's, why would Burger King invest millions of dollars in a soda dispenser technology, right? Something that they could already do very simply with a teenager going like this. Because the teenager going like that costs $9.19 an hour, plus L&I, plus workers' comp, plus this, plus that. Now the teenager going like this costs $15 an hour. Now, investing millions of dollars into a machine that pours soda pop starts to make a lot of sense because you recoup those costs and decrease labor costs within a year or two, right? Short-term, labor is inelastic. Long-term, it becomes elastic, and therefore what we'll see is the loss of jobs over time. Here's the kicker, and the point you should try to make, is that, folks, people who make lots of money, people who have what we call high human capital, skilled workers, they're not subject to automation. You're not going to create a machine that replaces a computer programmer. You're not going to create a machine that replaces a mechanical engineer. You are going to find a machine that replaces a baggage handler. So at the end of the day, who takes it in the short? The poor, the unskilled, the immigrant society, the people who have only a high school diploma. I'm not going to get affected by automation, okay? But the guy with the high school diploma or the GED is. This actually is a socioeconomic detriment to the poorest and least skilled among our society. But it will be pitched, ironically, as an initiative to help the very people that it hurts. That's the great irony of bad public policy, and that's the consequences of economic ignorance. So what should we expect to see? You know, a good social scientist should be able to predict, right? What would we expect to see if something like this passed? Well, the first place we can look is to where things like this are already adopted. I don't know if you know what Portland did. There's also an area where great advancements in public policy come from, is the City of Portland. But the City of Portland drew a circle around its city a few years ago, and they said, no more housing development within the circle. We don't want to create urban sprawl or something. Well, of course, what happened? The price of everything inside the circle doubled. And the city built up in a nice little circle around Portland. You can fly over Portland, you can actually see where the line is, right? So people just go to the other side of the line, right? So, lines in politics and economics are not very effective. So what are the things that I expect to see? Well, the first and foremost is I expect to see automation. I would predict that if this passes, the first people to go will be your baggage handlers. It's not that difficult to come up with an automated system where you come in, put a little barcode around your own luggage, drop it on a conveyor belt, a little laser thing reads that barcode and sends it to your plane, and one guy, instead of 20 guys, grabs your thing and throws it on the plane. We can replace 19 baggage handlers with one automated baggage system. So yeah, one guy is going to get a raise from $9 to $15, and the other 19 are going to get fired. Okay. The other thing I would expect to see is to go the way of the check-in person at airlines. You can go on the web, you order your ticket, they send you a ticket over your email, you print it out at home with a barcode. What do? You go to the airport, they will have what we're already seeing in grocery stores, self-checkout. You put your key under, you put your thing under there, a boarding pass will drop out of a machine, you take that boarding pass, you go. The only people still working at airports are going to be TSA agents, right? Because they have to be there. They're not replaceable, right? Or as replaceable. Rent-a-cars, the same thing. You're going to rent a car online. They're going to give you a code or a barcode to print out. You're going to go. You're going to put that thing into a machine. A vending machine-like thing will drop a key. It'll have a lot number and a stall number, and you will take the key and you will go get your car. When you drop it off, you'll put it in a different vending machine at the place that you arrive. And yes, the one person there will get a $8 raise, and the other 19 will get fired, right? Automation in the long run will eliminate the jobs that you're being forced to pay $15 an hour for. The other thing that you will see is what we call sometimes institutional learning, iterated games, but simply put, honest question, I don't think there's any cameras in here. How many of you have ever snuck candy into a movie theater? Yeah, come on, fess up, fess up. Well, why'd you do that? You didn't do it the first time. First time you went to a movie theater, you walked up and you're like a popcorn and a candy bar, and they're like, okay, thank you, that'll be $30. Like, what? Yeah, the candy bar's $10 and the popcorn's $12. Oh, okay, you got me this time. What happens the next time you go to the movies? Hey, let's go to Safeway, buy a $2 candy bar, I'll shove it in my pocket or in my wife's purse, and we'll do it that way, right? You learn, right? This is, an iterated game, right? Well, the first time somebody shows up to SeaTac, right? Maybe they don't live around here, they haven't been to the airport in 5 years, they're going to pull in, they're going to go buy a hamburger, the hamburger will be $14, right? They'll suffer sticker shock. The next time you come to the airport, what do? You stop in Burien, you leave an hour early, you stop in Burien, you have dinner, then you drive into SeaTac knowing that, you're not going to buy dinner there. I just went up to Seattle yesterday. I went to see the World Cup game. I've been in West Stadium before. You know what I did? I got there an hour early. I bought a $4 beer, right, at the bar outside. And then I walked in, so I didn't have to buy a $10 Budweiser once I got into the stadium, right? Now, the first time I went to a Mariners game, sure, I paid $10 for the beer. I didn't know any better. I got there, I ordered the beer, I was like, holy cow, $10 for a beer, I'll never do this again. And I haven't, okay? SeaTac will be the I'll never do that again city, right? The first time they come here, yeah, they're going to buy the $14 hamburger. Yeah, they'll pay the $200 hotel room, and then they'll say never ever again. The next time they come to the airport, they'll stay in a hotel outside of the city limits, they'll eat there, and they'll drive in, okay? Because people are more mobile than capital, and people are smarter than capital, right? So these are some of the things I expect. The other thing I expect to see is that what you will see develop is all the hotels who live on the rim of SeaTac will start offering free taxi service to the airport. Because what they're going to do is they're going to look at the cost of a hotel here. They're going to say, okay, my room is $89, theirs is now $150. So how can I entice those customers to drive to be 2 or 3 miles more from the airport? What I'm going to do is say, you can have free taxi service from my hotel to the airport, and I can still have a better bottom line than the guys at SeaTac. So I'm going to give my room for $89. I'm going to give them a $10 cab ride for free. My costs are still $99, and it's still $150 over there. So what you'll see is clever hotel operators just start offering free taxi service on the outside of SeaTac to end run the need to get a room here, right? And of course, no one in their right mind would ever have a conference or any type of banquet here when a mile away. You could do it for a third of the cost. So this is what we would predict. So it's interesting how the unintended consequences of public policy is that you have a group of well-meaning people who are economically ignorant set out to craft public policy that will help the poor. And ironically, at the end of the day, they will have crafted consequences that do far more damage to the poor than anybody else, right? Far more damage than what the status quo would have done. A historical perspective, because I'm a professor, and if you're going to invite a professor, you're going to get a historical perspective. It just comes with the territory. A lot of people talk about why we ended up with the Constitution we did. This is an interesting story. Under the Articles of Confederation, which was far more democratic, there was a group of farmers who went out and they borrowed a ton of money from bankers. And then they went to the state legislature in Pennsylvania and they asked for a law that said they didn't have to pay it back. And it passed. And in the short run, this was very successful. You had all these farmers who went out and borrowed all this money, they had the cash, and then they used the democratic process to say, well, you don't have to pay it back. And they all had themselves on the back about how clever they were in the short run. But what do you think happened in the long run? No bank would offer a second loan to a farmer in Pennsylvania. Penny wise, pound foolish. Short-term smart, long-term stupid, right? And so it was reasons like this that people like James Madison, James Monroe, Benjamin Franklin, okay, started to step forward and say, we have to have a republic rather than a pure democracy. Because in a pure democracy, 51% of the people can steal anything they want from the other 49. And that's kind of what you have going on in SeaTac. You have $5 billion in assets sitting right there. $5 billion in assets. And for $100,000 in campaign contributions, you can take it all. Right? You can take it all. That's a good investment. You guys, a lot of my fellow citizens are always complaining about the amount of money spent in politics. They're like, oh, all that money wasted in politics. No, it's not wasted. How many of you as a business person here would invest $100,000 in return for $5 billion in asset return? That's a great deal. It's a great deal, right? So for the Labor Council, this is very economically efficient. So I would encourage you to fight the initiative, okay? But I would also encourage you to save a little money for lawsuits afterwards. There are some aspects of this initiative that I've read that are legally weak, and I think that even if you lose at the ballot box, you will be able to win on some grounds in the courtroom door. And that is kind of the beauty of our Republican form of government, is that if direct democracy is used to impugn the rights of minority groups, you can always go to a court and get a defense of minority rights, even in the face of overwhelming public opposition. And I think that you might have to go that route after the political process is over. So thank you for having me. It's always interesting to come talk to a group of interested citizens.